David Brooks wrote a column in the New York Times where he says don't follow the money, arguing that big spending candidates often lose to lesser funded challengers. Your response, Bob Edgar?
Well, I think that Brooks, his op-ed piece in the New York Times was just off base. It is true that some candidates with large pocketbooks and spending large amounts of money often don't win. But it's also true that all of the money that's flooding into campaigns now give candidates an advantage. If you start a campaign with $4 or $5 million for a House race, you can overwhelm not just the incumbent, but you can overwhelm the system. And we think that candidates are now using secret money. They're using foreign money. They're using money they're using money that's not disclosed. The Supreme Court decision just simply opened the campaign coffers for a flood of money, and you've not only seen an exponential increase in money in this campaign, but wait till 2012. I mean, you could have a rogue corporation come in on the 2012 campaign and put $1 billion on the table. And who's to stop them? Because the Supreme Court said that money is speech, that corporations are persons. My wife, who is an operating room nurse, says that she'll believe corporations are persons the day after they have a colonoscopy.
Well, and the growing trend in both the Democratic and Republican parties for wealthy individuals to finance their own campaigns. I mean, of course, in New York City, we have the premier example of Michael Bloomberg himself, but Meg Whitman, John Corzine, all of these folks who literally were not known in the political realm until they agreed to put huge amounts of their own personal money on the line to win.
There are very few poor people represented in the House and Senate. I was a Protestant chaplain before I got elected, and I was making $11,000 a year. And I got elected, and in those days, 1975, congressmen were making $44,000. Several of the senior congressmen came to me very early and wanted increase in their wages. I think, you know, many of the people who get elected, who have $100 million to invest in a campaign, have very little experience about the average working poor, the people who are living on a minimum wage. Just recently, someone getting minimum wage working 52 weeks a year was making below the poverty level. And Congress, it took a long time to convince Congress, if you're going to move from welfare to workfare, you got to pay an adequate wage for persons. And one of the points that our new chair, Robert Reich, who was former labor secretary, is making is that the economic trauma that we're facing right now is how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And the rich, who are funding many of these campaigns, are institutionalizing that income gap. And that's causing great trauma to our economic system.
You represented the area of Pennsylvania that Joe Sestak was a congressman from. Now he's in a hotly contested race against Republican Toomey for the Senate. Can you talk about this race?
Yes. Joe Sestak has been in Congress for the last 4 years, and he successfully beat Arlen Specter, who switched parties to become a Democrat because he couldn't win in the Republican primary.
Ran against Specter.
I ran against Arlen Specter in 1986. Specter calls me his favorite opponent in these days. Joe stepped forward against Obama, against Eddie Rendell, the governor, and decided to run because he believed that it's not bad for someone to change parties, but it's bad for the reasons that Arlen Specter changed parties, simply because he couldn't win in his own party. If he changed because of ideological reasons, it would have been different. So he risked himself in the primary. He is in a very tight race with Toomey, and I think it's going to come down to the wire. There are two things that I think we ought to be concerned about. One is, if it's as close as some people say it is, I'm hopeful that the election machinery is in place where you can have an honest recount. Common Cause is concerned that all over the country, in places like Pennsylvania and New York and other places, they have bad election machines, some of which are computers and can't have an adequate recount. A couple years ago when Senator Franken won in Minnesota, it took 6 months to figure out who actually won the election. The good news about Minnesota...
A number of European countries are going to written ballots, back to written ballots. They're saying you cannot trust computers anymore.
Well, in Minnesota, people think that was a failed or a flawed election. Actually, it was a very good one. The Secretary of State was a good Secretary of State. The machines were good. You could do a recount. There were 11 judicial decisions, all agreed with the outcome of election night. If that same election had been held in many other states, we still wouldn't know who adequately won the election. We would have been in the same kind of problem that Florida was in 2000. So my hope is that in these very close elections all over the country, that the election administrators will be very careful to make sure that the count is accurate. And unfortunately, it's too late to change the machinery, but it's not too late to make sure that the recounts that will take place are done fairly and adequately in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way.
Bob Edgar, we want to thank you very much for being with us. President and CEO of Common Cause, former Pennsylvania Congressman and Methodist minister. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we're going to talk more about Citizens United, about this decision, and this whole issue of corporations being treated as people. Stay with us.